On the morning of January 15th, 1947, a mother was walking her young daughter through a quiet Los Angeles neighborhood when she spotted what she thought was a broken store mannequin lying in the grass. It wasn't a mannequin, it was the body of a 22-year-old woman, severed completely in half, drained of every drop of blood, and posed with surgical precision on a public sidewalk. The killer had washed her body clean, left no fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses. 77 years later, no one has ever been charged. This is the Unsolved Vault, and today we open the file on Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia. To understand this case, you first need to understand the victim. Because Elizabeth Short was not just a name in a police report. She was a real person, with dreams, struggles, and a life that deserved far better than the ending she received. Elizabeth Short was born on July 29th, 1924 in Hyde Park, Massachusetts. She was one of 5 daughters. Her father, Cleo Short, disappeared when she was just 6 years old. She believed he had died by suicide after his car was found abandoned near a bridge. He had actually just walked away from his family. Elizabeth grew up poor, moving between relatives and boarding houses. She suffered from severe asthma and bronchitis, which meant she spent winters in warmer climates, eventually drifting toward Florida and then California, chasing the sun and, like thousands of young women of her era, chasing Hollywood. She was strikingly beautiful. Dark hair, pale skin, green eyes. People remembered her wherever she went. But Elizabeth's life in Los Angeles was far from glamorous. She waitressed. She drifted between cheap hotels. She had relationships, none that lasted. She dreamed of becoming an actress, but never landed a real role. On January 9th, 1947, just 6 days before her body was found, she was last seen alive outside the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. She was 22 years old. January 15th, 1947, Leimert Park, Los Angeles, a quiet residential neighborhood. Betty Bersinger was walking with her 3-year-old daughter at around 10 a.m. when she noticed something in the grass along Norton Avenue. At first glance, she thought someone had dumped a broken department store mannequin. As she got closer, she realized the horrible truth. It was a young woman, completely nude. Her body had been severed at the waist and drained entirely of blood. The two halves had been posed, deliberately, carefully, spoled about a foot apart, as if arranged for display. Her face had been slashed from the corners of her mouth toward her ears, a grotesque wound investigators would later describe as a Glasgow smile. Her skin had been scrubbed clean. Her hair had been washed and set. There wasn't a single drop of blood at the scene, which meant she had been killed somewhere else entirely, and then transported and posed here in the open, in broad daylight, on a public street. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was calculated, deliberate, theatrical. Betty Bersinger ran to the nearest house and called the police. Within hours, the Los Angeles Police Department had flooded the scene. Within days, newspapers across the country had picked up the story. The press, not the police, gave Elizabeth Short her famous nickname, the Black Dahlia, reportedly inspired by a film noir movie called The Blue Dahlia that had been released the previous year, and Elizabeth's known preference for black clothing. The name stuck, and in many ways, it erased the real person, turning Elizabeth Short into a symbol rather than a human being. The LAPD launched one of the largest investigations in Los Angeles history. Over 150 detectives were assigned at various points. More than 150 suspects were formally investigated. Dozens of men confessed, all of them false confessions, made by disturbed individuals seeking attention or notoriety. The real killer never came forward. What investigators did piece together was chilling. Elizabeth's body showed signs of having been kept somewhere for days after her death. The killer had expert knowledge of anatomy. The bisection was clean, performed with surgical precision, possibly by someone with medical training or experience in mortuary work. There were ligature marks on her wrists and ankles, suggesting she had been restrained and tortured before death. The cause of death was ultimately determined to be hemorrhage and shock from the lacerations to her face, meaning she was alive during part of what was done to her. Then, the case took an even darker turn. On January 24th, 9 days after the body was found, the Los Angeles Examiner received a package in the mail. Inside was Elizabeth Short's birth certificate, her social security card, photographs, names from her address book, and a note made from cut-out newspaper letters that read, "Here is Dahlia's belongings, letter to follow." The killer had contacted the press directly. He was taunting investigators, playing a game. The promised follow-up letter never came, or if it did, it revealed nothing useful. The package itself had been soaked in gasoline before mailing, destroying any fingerprint evidence. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Over the decades, more than 500 suspects have been named by investigators, journalists, and amateur sleuths. Let me walk you through the most credible ones. Suspect 1, George Hodel. This is the name that comes up most often in serious investigative circles. George Hodel was a brilliant, wealthy Los Angeles physician, charming, well-connected, and deeply disturbed. His own son, Steve Hodel, a former LAPD homicide detective, spent years investigating his father and became convinced he was the killer. Steve Hodel published his findings in a book and pointed to several damning pieces of evidence, including a photograph found among his father's belongings that appeared to show Elizabeth Short, and the fact that his father's home had been under LAPD surveillance in 1950, during which investigators allegedly recorded him saying, and I quote, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now." George Hodel fled to Asia shortly after and lived abroad for decades. He died in 1999. Never charged. Suspect 2, Walter Bailey, a respected surgeon who lived 1 block from where Elizabeth's body was found. He had connections to the Short family through his daughter. He was known to be suffering from a degenerative brain disease at the time, which some investigators believe may have contributed to erratic violent behavior. He died in 1948, just 1 year after the murder. Suspect 3, Mark Hansen, a nightclub owner with whom Elizabeth had stayed for a period. Her address book, recovered from the mailed package, listed his name. He was interviewed multiple times but never charged. None of these men were ever prosecuted. The evidence against each remains circumstantial. So why, after 77 years, does this case remain open? Several reasons. First, the crime scene was compromised from the start. Hundreds of officers, reporters, and curious civilians flooded the scene before proper protocols were established. Evidence was lost, contaminated, or simply never collected. Second, the LAPD of 1947 was not the forensic agency it is today. There was no DNA analysis, no digital records, no surveillance cameras. The tools we take for granted simply didn't exist. Third, and perhaps most troublingly, some investigators over the years have alleged that the LAPD actively suppressed evidence to protect powerful figures in Los Angeles society. Whether that's true remains unproven. And fourth, the media circus around the case actually damaged it. False confessions flooded in. Tips were impossible to verify. The story became so sensationalized that separating fact from fiction became nearly impossible. Elizabeth Short came to Los Angeles with a dream. She deserved the chance to live it. Instead, her name became a headline. Her death became entertainment, and her killer, whoever he was, walked free. The Black Dahlia case remains one of the most investigated, most written about, and most heartbreaking unsolved murders in American history. The LAPD case file is still technically open. Somewhere out there, the truth exists. It always does. But for now, the vault stays locked. If you want justice for Elizabeth Short, share this video. And if you have a case you think we should investigate next, drop it in the comments. I'll see you in the next file.